Hello. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the May 2024 Product Operations HQ Meetup. Thanks for joining us. My name is Alyssa Vaz. I'm joined today by my co-host Anna and our guest Max. For those of us that are new, welcome. Our monthly meetup is created to serve the needs of the growing product operations community. And we do our best to connect our network by putting on informative webinars on the newest topics in the world of product. We provide networking opportunities to meet more like-minded folks, and we host a virtual space to ask questions and tap into the communal prod ops wisdom. We do that through our Slack community. My co-host Anna is going to drop a link in the chat. So if you're not there yet, we'd love for you to join us on Slack today. And actually what I love about this community is how global we are. So how amazing that you can connect with people from the other side of the world, or someone that could be, right down your street from your town. So what I would love to see is where you guys are from. So what we always do is we tell people where we're from, and then we put that in the chat. So if you want to go ahead and help us and tell us where you're joining from today. While we're all saying hello and introducing ourselves, I just want to make a few notes about today's session. And as always, because of the number of participants, we just want to ask that you keep your mic muted for the majority of our talk, our presentation. As always, this session is being recorded and it'll be available later on. And finally, the ideas that we're talking about today, they're farming across the industry as we speak. And so it was important for us for this meetup to capture your thoughts on it, the thoughts of the facilitators of the product operating model. And so after Max's presentation, what we do is we'll do a Q&A, but we'd also love to hear from you guys on the subject. And if you feel like your experience here is relevant, feel free to unmute and comment and, jump into the conversation. So we're a big friendly community in that way. All right. So we have an amazing session lined up today for you, but as we know, it would not be possible without Dragonboat. Dragonboat helps the entire product team prioritize and deliver impact across their portfolio of products, provides a single platform to manage your entire product operating model. So please do check us out at dragonboat.io/product-ops. And Anna will drop the link in the chat for you just to do that. But today we're not talking about that. We're talking about benchmarking your product operating model. And today we have with us Maxwell Dyke, who is the Senior Portfolio Success Architect working with Dragonboat. And Maxwell brings a wealth of experience. He helps companies operationalize their product strategies to drive success. So today we're here to learn from his insights, from helping teams of all shapes and sizes to implement their product operating model. So welcome, Max.
Hello, thank you so much, Alyssa and Anna. Really happy to be here, everyone. Thank you all for taking the time. Quick bit about myself. I've worked in tech for the past 8 years. Most recently, before Dragonboat, I was at Cloud Kitchens, which is a Travis Kalanick product-led startup. I was leading a customer success SMB over there. And I've been at Dragonboat for the past 2.5 years now as a senior portfolio success architect. Essentially, what that means is I've been working with all of our enterprise and key strategic customers on operationalizing their product operating model, which brings us to today. Awesome. So wanted to start today off with an interesting stat. And this one was actually discovered within this very product ops community. So really exciting to talk about that. It was based off a study that Anna and Alyssa did about a year ago, where we discovered that less than 30% of product investment and resources were directly connected to revenue. And so what that implies is that the other 70% is really not directly ROI driven. It's a bit of a shot in the dark as far as where those resources are going compared to the direction of the business and the strategy that you're trying to achieve. And so the challenge that we have to take up here as product folks is, how do we expand that proportion? How do we make sure that there is a connection between what you're working on and releasing today and the company's top line? And the companies that I work with really see this as an urgent priority because the market is changing so quickly these days. There's really no time to lose. and you really can't be afford to be spending time and resources on things that won't drive the business forward. So the result of that is product organizations really need to adapt quickly to rapidly changing market conditions, and product teams are required to be more agile in their product strategy and their execution. Next slide here. Perfect. And so that brings us to the product operating model. The product operating model is a leading framework for the challenge that we're talking about. It's really the sort of best path here to being able to resolve that gap between what's being done is ROI driven versus a little bit more of that shot in the dark. And so you've heard of the product operating model, I'm sure before. There's a number of voices talking about this, Melissa Perry, McKinsey, really across the industry. This is something that a lot of people are starting to really focus on. And every organization has a unique model, a unique product operating model. The key facilitator of the model is, of course, product operations. So there's three main components of the product operating model that we're going to talk about: the data, the processes, and the people. And it's really essential that you know what this looks like within your organization so that you are able to drive the type of impact that you're looking for at a business level. I think we have a little poll here.
Yeah, just a second. Let me pull that up.
So as Alyssa pulls this up, we have a little poll here just to really kind of gauge from everyone here today where you're at with your product operating model today, how you see the product operating model being operationalized in your organization.
Can you guys see that yet? No?
I think we got it now.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. All right. So let's see. What we want to see is if there's something that's disconnected from the rest of your model, maybe you feel like it's an element that's missing, or if we haven't captured it here, feel free to add it in the chat if you think that there's a component that works for you that we haven't listed. So I'm looking at the answers, and actually it seems that there's quite a lot of variation. And a number of people say all of the above. So that's interesting to note. All right. So it looks like I'm going to end the poll now, and it looks like with 43% of us are missing requests, or rather maybe that's disconnected. And that's interesting because I feel like that represents a customer centricity that, product operations sometimes is not plugged into, but sometimes they are. And I think that makes a big difference. And I really hope that we get to hear about that from Max today. Great. So I will close the poll. You guys can still see my screen. It's all good. Let's keep going.
Perfect. Yeah, so the results are actually really consistent with what we see most of the time. And the key thing to think about from the product operating perspective is that there's really not one required way of doing things. There's a number of different variations to the model. So today we're just going to discuss some of the typical variations that we've seen before. And we're going to use a customer as an example. This customer operates at a massive global scale. They're in the financial services space. They have multiple portfolios, each one consisting of hundreds of people. So the complexity here for this customer is really one of the major issues that they wanted to tackle initially. And the way they did that was really by operationalizing their product operating model with a very simple start. So the first win that they achieved was being able to establish visibility into what previously was really siloed work happening across various different teams and portfolios in very specific areas. And when they were able to establish that visibility, it allowed them to really up-level their ability to deliver more effectively on higher level strategic initiatives that were cross-team or cross-product or cross-portfolio even. So establishing that source of truth for road mapping allowed them to see those dependencies across teams much more quickly. It also gave teams autonomy in their ability to operate effectively because they were able to see the bigger picture and able to make decisions more quickly. Great benefit of this was that it actually helped them to streamline their quarterly planning process. So something that typically took 2-3 weeks, even a month sometimes, they were able to cut down to a week, 10 days, even less for some of the smaller teams by having that level of visibility available to them. And a great piece of that as well is that they were then able to implement resource allocation to reach delivery milestones. So things that otherwise might have seemed disconnected, a milestone that was a little bit more abstract, they were able to plan more effectively against and then allocate really quickly. So they didn't stop there. They kept going. And the next big win that they had was by calibrating the goals that they had across the organization. And these were goals that were not just product specific goals, but were really tied all the way to the business level goals that were being set for the organization and being able to work from that top down perspective. And this helped them evolve from really just the what, which, as we talked about with that visibility, they were able to execute at a higher level. So they were executing the what piece really well, but then tying that to the why, and really understanding that that there was really a higher level objective that they were trying to achieve, and making sure that that was the focus during their road mapping, planning, and execution. And this created accountability at each level of the organization, so everyone was started to work more synergistically together to achieve these outcomes versus just focusing on individual roadmap delivery. They also started collecting and analyzing feedback. So I saw that was one of the things in the polls that was, I think it was like 30 or 40% that people had said was disconnected. So taking that feedback, not just externally from customers, but also internally across the organization, being able to analyze that and couple that with the goals that they knew they wanted to achieve to really prioritize in a more meaningful way and make sure that all of the stakeholders internally and externally were being represented with the work that was being achieved. And so one of the key elements that they put in place that really allowed them to make sure that they were tracking this and achieving this in an effective way was they established pillars for the user experience based off various product metrics. And one key thing that I'll add here that I thought was a really great insight was that the product metrics they were looking at were not just about hands-on keyboards and getting people engaged, but it was really about looking at what the value that their products and services were offering was achieved by those customers. And sometimes, more hands-on keyboards doesn't necessarily lead to more value. So those product metrics was a key way for them to be able to look analytically at what that value was and make sure that that was being tracked. And so that the features that they were working on was improving that value for their customer. All right. And this was the big one. This is the third win that they achieved here. And so at this stage, they were not just making sure that they were delivering and executing in more effective ways. They weren't just gathering feedback and tying this to goals, but they were also starting to track those goals and the ROI that their company was seeing based off all of the work, resources, and time that their teams are spending on building out these products. The outcomes that they were driving were being measured by various business metrics, and they weren't just looking at the completion of the features themselves. So being able to execute towards achieving all of their delivery goals, but being able to make sure that they had these key metrics that were tied to the strategic goals of the business that were also being driven and improved by the work that was being done. So not just delivering features, but delivering the right features to drive the business. Having so many different elements of this model, the organization was able to really align and tie all of that together in a way that was not only clearly visible for the teams that were executing and operating, but also really easily communicated out to various stakeholders so that they could see this impact and make sure that really everyone was on the same page. It really was the kind of last piece of the puzzle for them to take a step forward from a cultural standpoint and have the organization all operating within the same sort of cohesive mindset as far as what they were doing and what they were trying to achieve.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting that, when you calibrate so many elements in your model, you're really creating a culture around how you build product. And sometimes that's not an aspect that we really anticipate as product ops professionals, but I think that's an interesting outcome, the fact that the team was able to comment on the culture that was being, elevated here. While we're on that, I do have another poll for us in just a second. So as you guys have heard Max's story about this particular organization and you're looking at the different chapters of it, what I'm curious about is what story you're hearing that's resonating the most with you. So we're going to launch another poll in just a second, and I'd love to hear which chapter of this story you are identifying the most with. So whether you're considering yourself a bit more delivery or output focused, whether you're thinking that, you're more calibrating with your internal and external stakeholders. So you've got, the requests down, you've got your goals down, or maybe you're seeing that you really are that outcome driven piece that's really identifying whether you're closing the loop on the business outcome and you're delivering to the business case. So that would be really interesting to see. So I'm going to give another few seconds here for people to, let's give it another minute because I'm really interested in that one. But would be nice. And as well, of course, if you're feeling like you want to add something here, or if you have a story to contribute, we'd love to hear it. If you're feeling like none of those apply, or maybe there's something else, we'd love to see that in the chat. That's interesting. Okay. All right, so I'm going to stop the poll now. All right. And I'm going to share the results. So it looks like we're looking at an output or a delivery focused stage for the majority of people. But I would say that it's there's variation here with our group today. So that I think that would actually be an interesting thing to talk about, why people feel like they're in the output or the delivery focused stage, and whether you're feeling how you're feeling about the other parts of the story. So feel free to comment, or Anna, are you saying there's a question in the chat? Do we want to read that out loud? Okay. Riva wants to know if we can elaborate a bit more on the requests piece. So Max, do you feel comfortable to comment on what is requests? How is it fit into the larger model, and potentially how that has been implemented in your experience?
Yeah, definitely great question. So most people are, gathering feedback and requests, I think, from their customers. Certainly hearing it internally, I'm sure. The key piece here is that, as we kind of talked about, everything in the product operating model is related, and making sure that there's that level of alignment is where you're going to really be able to start to operationalize on a more strategic level. So for requests, what we've seen is, being able to triage those in a more meaningful way really starts to take place when you have the goals and the outcomes in mind. So being able to take all of those requests and prioritize them in a way that's not just, who might have the loudest voice or who may have sort of what seems to be the most urgent need, but prioritizing that through the framework of what do we want to achieve as an organization, as a business, and allowing that to sort of guide you in filtering those requests, where sometimes folks may be looking for something that's seems really important, but it starts to drift away from the direction that you want to lead as an organization or with a particular product. And keeping that in mind is really key. And so that's where I think those two things kind of really go hand in hand together. Having those goals, and I saw there's a I think outcome driven was the second most in the poll, which is really exciting to see, because maybe 6, 8 months or a year ago, it might have been not even close. So it sounds like a lot of people are really starting to understand, the importance of that, and how to bring that into your product operating model. But the request is a great piece because it's never too early to start looking at things through the lens of those outcomes. And request is really sort of that first moment where you have the opportunity to look at all of that feedback and triage it against the outcomes that you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, as a product manager, I love to see when requests are actually included on the roadmap, which I know sounds kind of funny, or maybe unorthodox for some folks. But what I love to see is the connection of a roadmap item to, how many requests does it have? What's the value associated with this? And those types of data points can make you help you make really fast prioritization decisions, and help you build a really cohesive roadmap. So that's an interesting one, definitely. All right, so we want to continue the story. If you enjoyed this walkthrough of this customer story, obviously this one had very neat chapters. What we want to do is we want to encourage you to look into an additional resource here. If you want to learn from the story of the large financial services organization, we encourage you to check out the CPO series on this. Obviously, for those of you who don't know, CPO series is a webinar series that we run in parallel. And this particular one is with the US Bank CPO of their BNPL, or buy now, pay later product, Rob Seidman. And to get access to the rest of the story, please check out the link that my co-host Anna is going to drop in the chat. It's also available through the Dragonboat website. So that's US Bank empowered by Dragonboat. All right, before we turn to questions and comments from you guys, I do want to add one thing, another quick word about Dragonboat, our sponsor. If you and your team are looking to operationalize your product operating model and maybe apply some of what you learned today, I do encourage you to check out the only platform that helps you do that. So in order to see Dragonboat in action, please do sign up for a demo by scanning the code here on the screen, or you can access the URL that Anna is going to helpfully provide in the chat. Excellent, thank you. All right. So at this moment, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open it up for questions. If any of the folks here have questions on the content that Max has been presenting based on his experience, or if you'd like to share your experience based on where you are in those story chapters, we'd love to hear that as well, because obviously this is, the experience that Max has presented in this wonderful story of a particular journey of one organization. But we do love to see sort of the mosaic of experiences around this. What made sense to you? What didn't? We'd love to hear it all. So if you guys have questions coming. Okay, so we do have one question I came through here. We want to ask, this is a long story, so it seems like the person wants to know, can you start small with this, right? So I'm just interpreting the question here, but if you have this grand complex model, right, that you're visualizing on the screen, that might be a little bit intimidating. I mean, I know it is to me to watch this, but can you start small? Can you operationalize, even smaller than maybe what we've presented here? What are your thoughts, Max?
Of course, yeah. You could definitely start small. This particular customer, and I definitely highly recommend everyone check out that webinar with Rob Seidman. It's really great and pretty quick watch. And he gets into a little bit more details on all the things I touched on as far as how they got through each one of those wins. And they started small as well. Everyone, I think you got to start somewhere, of course. They had a really complex model, so they had really sort of broad scope of what they wanted to achieve. But ultimately, for everyone, it's about recognizing, I think, what the immediate needs are for your organization, and being able to focus on that and achieve that, and then sort of take stock and adjust accordingly. The I would say I'm very curious to hear if people have, examples of where they're at and, thoughts and questions about maybe their particular situation, because as we mentioned at the top, everyone's product operating model is a little bit unique. And of course, everyone's situation is unique. So of course, start small. I think that's probably the best way to do it. The great thing about the product operating model is you really start to see value incrementally at every step along the way. So it's about recognizing what that immediate value or need is for you, and starting there.
Okay, great. So what we'll do is we'll ask for a little bit, if there's any further questions on Max's presentation, or if there's any comments on, people's experience or other alternative opinions on this, that would be nice to hear.
Would love to hear where everyone's at.
Yeah. I've definitely seen a variety of these things, but Max as the expert definitely has seen a number. And so it was interesting to see that this particular story kind of has a nice beginning and an end. And so thanks so much, Max, for sharing that. Okay, I'm seeing that okay, so we're done with the presentation. Maybe what we'll do is we'll open up the chat. If people want to turn on their cameras and comment, happy to meet people today in the meetup. Hey, Sienna. All right. So if there's no further questions, what we can do is, as we're on time today, we can wrap up today's session. Max, thank you so much for coming out here and giving us all your insights. If you want to keep the discussion going, what we'll ask is that you join the Slack community. And if you have questions, you can reach out directly either to us. You can find Max on LinkedIn, and let's keep the conversation going. So check the invitation link in the chat, hop on board.
I think we got one question here, Alyssa, actually, that just dropped in from Riva. So happy to speak to that. Yeah, great question, Riva. So it's a new product op team influencing a change from output focused to outcome focused. Yeah, great question. So I think that actually goes back to my last answer. I would definitely recommend starting small. And so, typically that first that first sort of low hanging fruit is being able to provide that level of visibility, and being able to provide the alignment between the strategy and the work that's being done. As that starts to get more clear for folks and people can see that, this is sort of the overall outcome that we're trying to achieve, it starts to slowly ingrain the mindset. And that mindset is something you can definitely work on in parallel. There's a lot of great resources out there about becoming more outcome focused. And it's a great way to sort of help folks make sure that they're thinking of the right things when they're going through their planning and prioritization practices. As you build on that, you can start to sort of evolve it a little bit more, where then you start to actually measure those outcomes. And the impact becomes really clear. And I think it starts to build on itself and you start to gain momentum as you go. But I would definitely recommend starting with the visibility piece and the alignment of the actual work to the goals, and make that really clear so that everyone can see that, at every level of the organization.
And so would you then recommend from product ops perspective, right, in terms of starting maybe with, for lack of a better way of putting it, roadmap governance, like before, because for the most part, it's a feature factory, right? A lot of us are at this point. And so we are actually a new team that's getting involved as one of our first pieces of influence in roadmaps, right? And if we are then saying we are product ops, we're going to partner with product management on roadmap governance, then what are the top 3 things that you would suggest that I should focus on as a product ops partner to my PM?
Mm-hmm. So I would actually recommend first and foremost starting top down with those goals. I think if you focus just on the PM level, you're going to be still working within more of a siloed perspective, and it's going to make it really difficult to evolve more holistically. That's one of the key pieces of the product operating model, is that it's really the holistic vision of what the organization is trying to achieve. So I would recommend starting top down from more of a strategic perspective. That doesn't necessarily mean you need to have, really well-defined goals that are tying directly. Even it could just mean something as much as looking at strategic initiatives that may be multi-quarter efforts involving a couple different product teams, and being able to use that as sort of the guiding force for what teams are working on quarter over quarter or release over release. I would also recommend, of course, I would recommend having a tool in place. I think that there's a lot that you can work on as far as mindset and process, but if you don't have the right tool in place, it makes it really difficult for people to be able to actually execute on that. And then also the tool sort of puts the bumpers and guidelines up there for people to be able to kind of fall into best practices more naturally. And then the third piece, I would recommend standardization. I think if we're talking about an organization, it seems like of a large scale, when you don't have a certain level of standardization, of course, you want to give teams somewhat flexibility to be able to operate in the way that they're most effective. But you need some key themes that they can standardize around. And that is where I think more of that top-down perspective comes, whether that be goals, strategic initiatives, or particular metrics that you're tracking towards. Having that sort of shared level of process that they can collaborate around makes it really helpful.
There's another
Thank you.
comment here. Oh, thank you, Rio.
Great question.
There's another comment here that I just want to read out, and if the writer of the comment wants to jump in and add a bit. There's a lot of cross-functional work involved, and frequently coordinating and working with other teams to unblock initiatives. And as product operations folks, we definitely see this a lot. This is definitely a theme that comes up in our work very often, but it always looks unique to that organization or that team. Jacob, do you want to comment on how that looks like for you, just for other people's information or knowledge? Oh, maybe Jacob can not unmute. All right. So we'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
And then
I could speak to that really quickly though. So I'll just mention, I think that is really the challenge that comes when you don't have visibility. And the fact that you're having to frequently coordinate work with other teams to unblock things is something, and I see Jacob here, so feel free to elaborate. Hey, Jacob, being able to provide that level of visibility to teams and make it really accessible. So it's not necessarily just in a slide that, becomes out of date really quickly, or a spreadsheet that needs to constantly be updated, or, may have 10 million things within it. But a really kind of clear and easy way for folks to visualize what these potential roadblocks may be, the dependencies that are not necessarily just work-to-work dependencies, but if you want to, be able to deliver a more strategic, longer-term initiative, that there's so many teams involved that they're really dependent upon each other to be able to achieve what you're trying to achieve. And being able to provide that visibility early and make it really accessible really starts to empower the teams themselves to be able to go out and make adjustments, surface issues as they may arise, things that may cause delays, and be able to really kind of understand why these things are happening, and so that they can, of course, continue to improve moving forward. Is that helpful, Jacob?
Yeah. For me, sorry, I was having audio issues. For me, we are constantly working with other teams and to try to unblock initiatives. And one of the things that we started implementing is called BRD, business requirements documents. So traditionally, your product team is probably putting together PRDs, the product requirements documents. Our team has tried to work with the product managers to kind of get in front, position ourselves ahead of that process when possible, so that they can tell us what the initiatives are earlier. It's helpful. But essentially what we do is we kind of write out what are the business requirements, not just for product, but for operations as well, and try to integrate those. And we've had quite a lot of success in doing so. The product managers have started to be more open to including us earlier in the process to make sure that we can help in that way. But yeah, it's really just sometimes I'm just chasing people down saying, hey, I need to know very specific details on XYZ to unblock this so that we can move it forward, and kind of just positioning it as I'm helping you get this initiative moving forward by getting this information. That helps a lot.
Some
Thanks for
great
sharing that.
comment.
We have another question here that I want to make sure we get to. So Dina is asking, we have a small product ops team, myself and one other, in our digital organization that I launched 3 years ago. We are really struggling with stakeholder alignment across the organization and constant shifts in priorities. Any tips on this from a product ops perspective?
Yeah, I think that's probably one that a lot of people will be able to relate to. Things are changing really rapidly these days. We know that can lead to the need to pivot really quickly, and sometimes from a product perspective, that's difficult because things take time. And so I think one of the key things is when you're working from a top-down perspective, you typically can understand longer term objectives that are a little bit more stable. And I think that helps to inform if you may have needs or priorities that shift a little bit more rapidly as you're trying to stay on top of things at a team or product level. Being able to understand the big picture outcome of what you're trying to achieve is really helpful. And then ultimately, those are the things that when we're talking about C-suite, board, or really more of a strategic vision that has been established. That's something that is always a great fallback to understand, if you have to make some of these trade-off decisions, it should be ultimately what's in line with that longer term decision or longer term vision.
Yes, one of the—
It's not going to be perfect.
Yeah, one of the points that I left on the slides is that we have allocation on pretty much every version of that model. So I think what that means is you're really planning out that allocation ahead of time. How are you prioritizing those goals? Those numbers have to, stay consistent so that across the board, everybody really knows what the priorities are, even if sometimes at a very granular level, you're kind of, losing the forest for the trees. I hope I'm using the right analogy there. But I also want to, encourage others to comment on this and to see whether others are having similar thoughts, right? So this is a very specific example, but I'm sure that the experience is not unique, as Max mentioned.
Yeah, we have similar similar struggles with the organization planning a lot of things, and then the plans change or the priorities change, and that's a very frequently kind of a planning cycle struggle that we have. When the leadership team is deciding on which things we're going to be doing, it can help sometimes to kind of present if we're able to present recommendations that are kind of data based, such as if we do these 3 things or these 5 things, it'll have this outcome. And just to start, and if you just start talking about like the outcomes, people kind of start to pay attention to that. It doesn't always help, but it can.
Sometimes what I like hearing from product operations teams is that they've really plugged into the CPO perspective. And a webinar that we did recently with Ryan Polk from Stack Overflow talks exactly about how he makes trade-offs, within the cycle. So I do encourage you guys to check that out. There's the webinar is on the website that we always link to. So the CPO series is what it's called. Okay. All right. So we are, as I said, we're on time today. Thank you so much for your presentation, Max. We loved hearing the story. Thanks, guys, for participating in the chat and sharing your experience. Even if these things get tough and sometimes they get very abstract, it's good to know that there's a group of people out there that are going through the same thing. So I do encourage you again to join our Slack community and hop on board and keep the conversation going. So thank you all. It's been a pleasure. So I'll wrap up the meeting now, and we'll see you next month. Thank you all.
Thanks so much, everyone.